Hi everyone, #1 Marmaduke fan here. This Christmas I was gifted Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck, Treasure Under Glass, which is Volume 3 of the Don Rosa Library. Previously I reviewed Volume 1 of the Don Rosa Library, which I purchased by accident because I had heard about the Carl Barks Duck comics. I looked at it in the comic book shop, saw Volume 1 and grabbed it, and was pleasantly surprised by Don Rosa's enthusiasm, his detail. What I said in my review of that first volume was that Don Rosa is an artist punching above his weight class. This is someone who is very humble, I think, almost falsely humble about his weaknesses as an artist, who taught himself how to be an artist of the Disney duck characters and punched above his weight class by using really good habits to quickly learn how to draw these characters and tell these stories that existed in his head. He's also a very enthusiastic Carl Barks fan. I am kind of a fake geek guy on Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck. I haven't read the Carl Barks stories yet, but just like Volume 1, Don Rosa's enthusiasm and love for Carl Barks' world and his characters and stories makes me want to go pick up those Carl Barks books yesterday. So for this one, what I think we'll do is I want to read just one story with you out of this because there are 9 stories, and I think it'd be too much to do storybook time with Uncle Marmaduke fan for all of them. I actually don't like all the stories in this as much as some of them, but my total view is this is still a high recommend, especially when we look at some of my favorites. And all of them give you interesting things to look for, interesting things to talk about, and the notes are simply excellent. So let's look through the preface and the notes a bit to spark me, and then we will hop to Return to Xanadu, which was my absolute favorite story in this collection. So the preface here is much shorter than the preface in the first one. The preface in Volume 1 was obviously Don Rosa telling the whole story of how he came to be a Donald Duck artist and all the problems he had to overcome to make that happen. This one tells us a little bit about where and how these ones were published. These were published by Egmont Publishing, which I think is a Dutch publisher. So this is after Gladstone Publishing had ceased to exist. They were a little indie company that published Don Rosa's first few books, and this is when he started publishing internationally. And for some of these stories, this is their first time being printed in the United States. The Master Landscapist was a riot. I'm not going to do storybook time for all of these, though. We'll talk more about the Master Landscapist when I get to the notes. The time travel one was hilarious, and I loved how Don Rosa used the color yellow in the gutters to indicate when time travel is occurring. The Treasure Under Glass is the titular episode, and this is another great historical fiction adventure with real, the names of the ships are real, the historical information about the diving equipment of the Renaissance era, that's all real. So this is the kind of story that Don Rosa loved to tell. It has one of his great over-the-top climaxes. So excellent story. I really enjoyed the whole thing. But marking my page for my favorite story is my little YouTube chan doodle that I sketched out because I was feeling a little stir crazy and I wanted to doodle something. So thank you, YouTube chan comic, for being the bookmark for this one. Uncle Scrooge in Return to Xanadu. Now, the motto of this channel, summa spoilerum, summa triggerum, summa tangentum. All the spoilers. I'm going to be talking about things where, I think they're a neat surprise in the middle of the story. So if you like your surprises, this is your spoiler warning, maximum recommendation. Go get this. This is going to be spoiling something from the Carl Barks original stories. So, like Stan Lee says in the VHS edition of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, you can pause this videotape, we'll wait for you, and then you can come back after finishing the Carl Barks comics in this volume if you care about spoilers. Having said that, it's now all the spoilers. Everything from the story we're spoiling. Okay. So it opens with Uncle Scrooge telling the story of his great treasures, and Don Rosa, being a Carl Barks geek, can tell you in the index where every single comic book you can go read to find out where these treasures came from in the older comic Carl Barks comic books from the 1950s. And what we learn is that there's more to one of these treasures than was initially believed. The crown of Genghis Khan was actually just one piece of a larger treasure trove from Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, that Scrooge has not yet located. And fascinated by this idea, Scrooge McDuck brings Donald and the nephews on an expedition to find the lost treasure of Kublai Khan. They discover a hole in the ice where the crown was found, and as they explore these underground caverns, the Dewey, let me see, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, yeah, the blue one's Dewey. Dewey starts reciting a real poem by Samuel Purchas on Xanadu. So Samuel Purchas wrote a poem in tribute to this lost kingdom of Kublai Khan, and he's telling all these great, the poem is providing all these great visual details of what Xanadu looks like. Scrooge and the nephews arrive at a sluice, which is allowing water out into the river, and they see a doorway across the river. So they close up the sluice, stopping the water, so that they can. Inside the sluice is this incredible cavern with a waterfall coming from on high. So they close the sluice so they can stop the river and cross. But then the door immediately shuts behind them because it's meant to contain people within, not keep people out. So now they're trapped on the opposite side of this door. They come through the door and into, not Xanadu, but the land of Tra-la-la. Now, I recognize the land of Tra-la-la from an episode of DuckTales. Tra-la-la originally appeared in a Carl Barks comic from the 1950s. It didn't have any name, so people just call it Tra-la-la. And this is an example of Don Rosa using what he calls not a twist ending, but a twist middle. We built up the idea of Xanadu for the whole story, and here in the middle of the story, we discover that the entire time Xanadu was something that Scrooge, Donald, and the boys had already been to, the world of Tra-la-la, in Carl Barks' story. Now, what's really fascinating about this whole story is it stands alone as a good story, but Don Rosa is having to write a sequel to a comic that was previously published in the 1950s. And because Don Rosa cares about detail so much, it's like being fastidious, being too detailed is Don Rosa's weakness and Don Rosa's strength. It's his weakness because, even as he'll say, he would spend all his time drawing these extra painstaking details that his editors didn't like. But his attention to detail also let him pay attention to everything in the Carl Barks story and write a sequel which is consistent with the logic of the first story. So that means that not only are all the characters in the world consistent with Carl Barks, but even how Don Rosa told this story. He didn't want it. He wanted it to feel like a Carl Barks story. So a plot hole would be they come out into the land of Tra-la-la and everything's different from the version that Carl Barks told. That would be plot holes. Those would be inconsistencies. Rosa is concerned not just with avoiding inconsistencies, but having the total feel of the story be consistent with the story that Carl Barks told. So he doesn't want like a crazy dragon to come flying down into the middle of this. He wants it to feel, he wants the characters in the world to feel consistent with what has been established before. This is a remarkable bit of detail-oriented storytelling. So the Scrooge and the boys come out into the world of Tra-la-la, and Tra-la-la is essentially this utopian paradise where they have everything they need and they have no metal and no gold. And so Scrooge is, of course, at first Scrooge is very furious about this and he's very suspicious of these people, but over time he's charmed by the beautiful landscapes and he's reminded of his time in the Klondike, and slowly he is becoming more and more charmed as they are prisoners in this paradise. What is the word? Paradisical world? That's way too big. This paradise land. Sometimes I'm using too big of vocab words for my own good on this channel, guys. So after weeks go by and Scrooge is feeling fresh and reinvigorated, Donald's feeling less clumsy, they discover a catastrophe. The whirlpool has stopped because, ding, 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 they closed up the sluice and stopped the water from escaping when they entered the world of Tra-la-la. So now the pool has filled and there is danger in Tra-la-la. What's his name? Tra-la-la, da-da-da-da-da. Everyone in this is so politically incorrect. All of the names in Tra-la-la are sort of Chinese-esque puns on something in English. So like la-di-da, there we go. That guy's la-di-da. And Donald says, what's the llama's name? Lama Dama Ding Dong? And he says, no, it's Sam Jaffe. What a strange person you are. So that's a joke on Sam Jaffe from the movie, I think Shangri-La. That's a good movie. So they go to see the llama, and the llama is old and wise and kind of is a contrast to Scrooge's personality. Scrooge is capitalistic. The llama is a little bit more, I guess, Buddhist, or someone who is who prefers to live in a state of nature. And they're expecting to open up these doors and find gold, but all they find instead are steel bottle caps, which were a critical part of the plot in Carl Barks' story. So not only did Rosa pay attention to that, but he even lets these steel bottle caps, which were part of the plot in that story, come back and be a solution to the problem in this story. They need steel to cut through the door so that they can open the sluice and save Tra-la-la. There's this neat heroic moment where Donald is the only one who's young and strong enough to swim in and try to saw it open, and everything's flooding as he goes. And this is another example of Donald being a heroic character. These duck characters aren't just goofy little cartoon animals. They have human emotions, and they have emotional stakes in what they do. So Donald has to take a last breath of air. He cuts through with his last saw, the metal opener, and he gets through. And then he's telling himself, I can't do it alone. And then after he's given up, he lies there kind of looking really defeated in this goofy posture. And he starts telling himself that he has to do it for the sake of his family. And it's almost like he hypnotizes himself into do it. I can do it. I must do it. I will do it. Up he bursts, and with like one mighty pull, opens up the sluice, the water pulls out, and Donald Duck saves the day. This is a heroic character who, because he's a human character, is weak, and he's not just instantly able to do everything. He's kind of a loser. He's always unlucky. That's one of his defining characteristics. But when it counts, he does what he needs to do to protect his family. So because he opens this, then the whirlpool reappears, and all the boys come down. There's even this sad moment where he's trying to swing across the river like Duxan, and he thinks that this means he's never going to see Huey, Dewey, Louie, or Uncle Scrooge again. And then he flops right on top of them. There's human impact to these characters. Down they go, roaring down the crazy river into a little hole, and the force of the water pressure blasts them out, almost in India actually. And as they leave, then the crown is thrown away because it's seen as a cursed object down into the whirlpool, and then it floats down, and the golden treasure was there the whole time, and they missed it. It's a solid adventure story. It's a great tribute to Carl Barks. So the other stories are enjoyable. Some of them are really comedic. I love this whole story about Donald falling off a building. Some of them, what's beautiful about this book is that in the notes, Don Rosa talks about his own stories and how they were created and the strengths and weaknesses of them. He did one that's sort of a critique of superhero comics that comes off a little bit like Don Rosa saying, kids these days and their superhero comics, I don't like superhero comics. But as I read it, I actually was kind of charmed by it, and I think he was more making a point about what heroism is. So even if Don Rosa isn't the biggest superhero fan, all I'd say to Don Rosa is I think there are a lot of superhero stories which do have the heroic and moral character qualities he loves in the Disney comics and the Duck comics, but he's critiquing sort of the violent anti-hero who the whole point of the comics is just beating people up. And I identify with that because when I was a little kid, I never liked the Punisher. I never liked heroes who just shot a bunch of people. I wanted my superheroes to be heroes. So actually, even though I think he's a little bit dismissive of the superhero comic, I think that his broader point about heroism actually is pretty sweet, and I was charmed by that story. But when you get into the behind the scenes, we get so much fascinating stuff. We learn about how editors suggested he make changes, and how Don was forced to do these changes on his own budget. And then you get to do the compare-contrast between this one, which was published, and then the first one, which the editors rejected. And man, if I was his editor, this is the one the editors rejected. I would have much preferred this version. I think they were afraid of it being way too complicated to reproduce. But here you see all this flow and craziness and action in this whole scene. This is Don Rosa's climax to a big comedic story. And then in this one where he has to redraw it all in a hurry, you can tell he's not as in it. See, this pool stops here, but the horse is splashing in water, in grass. He clearly just took chunks of his old composition and smashed them together and got some things wrong in this one. So I agree with the editors of this book choosing to include his original version, which was the rejected version, and tacking on this version in the index. This is the version that was printed originally, and no one ever got to see the original version until this edition came out. And that's really that prompts a lot of really interesting questions, like if a comic book is changed significantly or the art is changed around, is it still the same comic book? I think the book The Philosophy of Comics has a few essays on that topic, but just from my perspective as an art geek who likes pretty art, I do not like this panel. I like the panel that was included in the regular story. In his Don Rosa's notes on each of these stories, he gives you all the details of the Carl Barks stories that inspired him, of the historical details that he used, and his notes on the return to Xanadu are as fascinating as the story of Xanadu himself. He gives you all these insane details to look for, where he got all his original inspiration. He talks about the whole creative process of having to tell a story that is continuing an older story, but isn't. You could write a sequel and it's a lame sequel. If the original is really good and it ends nicely, then why touch it? So he wants to pay homage to the Carl Barks story by building on what was established by Carl Barks and telling his own story in that world. I think that's something that's absolutely key. Don Rosa doesn't see this cartoon universe as just being a little fairy tale universe where none of this stuff matters. He sees this as a real universe, and he sees these characters as ways of drawing real people. So he sees Uncle Scrooge as a real person who just happens to be drawn as a duck. So when he tells a story in tribute to Carl Barks, he takes his subject matter seriously. This is incredible. I've never heard about this, but man, what these storyboards prove is that an enthusiastic person, enthusiasm is contagious. So I was never a big duck person. I'm kind of a big duck person now, thanks to Don Rosa's enthusiasm. So let me explain to you what this is. Don Rosa loved the return to Xanadu so much, he considered telling a third story on a topic that duck fans were asking me to undertake 24 years ago, and for which I still get a few requests. But he never got to tell this third chapter of the story. So what this is supposed to do is, this was him setting up a future chapter where he would return and tell a part 3 in the land of Tra-la-la. But that never got made for various reasons. So I have my theory on what this mystery is, but let's just look at this together. So what he says is that for various reasons he couldn't tell this third chapter, and this is something that duck fans have been asking for 24 years. Boy, this book got published last year, and I'm already interested in this really old mystery about the duck characters. All right, so what's interesting about this sketch is we see variety. We see Scrooge was in the background originally. These words were originally going to be one of the nephews, and he scratched that out and rewrote it as Scrooge's dialogue. But apart from that, it plays in a similar way. So here's the key scene. It's the scene where the boys made the steel saws, and then, what's his name? La-di-da comes to get them. And, La-di-da of Tra-la-la. I love these names. So La-di-da comes to get the boys, and he brings them to the llama. And the llama says, "You are Huey, Dewey, and Louie of Duckburg." And then the llama says that their names are significant, and that the land of Tra-la-la holds a secret which is relevant to their destiny. And then after they leave, the llama says that the boys will return because the secret is part of their destiny, and they're going to return to discover the secret. 24 years go by, and no one knows what the secret of Tra-la-la is. So are you ready, guys? Super spoiler. Here's my theory on what the secret of Tra-la-la is. I think that this would have been Don Rosa's version on what happened to Huey, Dewey, and Louie's mother, where in one of these stories, it's explicitly said that the boys are orphans, and that Uncle Donald is watching them. Oh, that's the superhero parody story. So the reason that that was such a great story too. I'm sorry I'm flipping back, but in the superhero story, Donald Duck feels sad because the boys idolize their violent superhero comics, and he feels like a loser. So he wants to become a superhero, so they idolize him. And then by the end of the story, the boys are showing that they actually do idolize their Uncle Donald. They do see him as a hero, even though he doesn't have any superpowers, because he's cared for them, and they're orphans, and he's taken on the responsibility of caring for them on his budget. So what this establishes is that in Don Rosa's world, based on the Carl Barks stories, the boys aren't just visiting their Uncle Donald. He isn't just there because cartoon characters can be whoever and it doesn't matter. The boys are orphans in the world of Don Rosa. This is a sad topic, but this is something which makes sense because Don Rosa is interested in these characters as human characters, not just as little cartoon fairy stories. So the boys are orphaned. What I think this was going to be was the hidden story of what happened to Huey, Dewey, and Louie's mother. Maybe she visited Tra-la-la as an adventurer, and the llama knew her, and there was going to be some big adventure to go find Huey, Dewey, and Louie's mother. The new DuckTales show is already setting this up as a subplot they're going to be building. What happened to Huey, Dewey, and Louie's mom? DuckTales creators, I'm sure they know and love Don Rosa's comics. So I will be very interested to see if I don't know, Don Rosa is kind of nearing his retirement, but they should hit up Don Rosa. I'm sure they're showing lots of love. If they aren't, they should be, but they should be letting Don Rosa know how much they appreciate his work. They should be looking carefully at his work because this is fascinating. I wish that Don Rosa got to tell this story because I think his version of what happened to Huey, Dewey, and Louie's mom would have been epic, but sadly that was not to be. So it continues with historical notes from the Dutch editions on Kubla Khan and all the little obscure details. I can't talk about it all, but everything that Don Rosa does, it has some root in Disney's history and the characters' history, language, all this great stuff. You know, parents, get your kids this book. Where are your kids going to learn about Henry Wadsworth Longfellow? Well, from a Carl Barks and Don Rosa comic, that's for sure. And then the Rosa archives are little bits and details from Don Rosa's past. So this was a drawing he did for a fanzine that started circulating in an unauthorized way. People started copying this and pasting this and sharing it around without Don Rosa's permission, without explaining what it was or where it came from. This was a fanzine drawing that was meant to illustrate a drawing challenge where most people, told a joke or did some sort of crass humor. How did Scrooge McDuck die? And then Don Rosa, because he takes the character seriously, did a serious mourning of the death of Uncle Scrooge with Huey, Dewey, and Louie as adults and Donald and Daisy as old man, as an old couple. The Life and Times of Don Rosa tells a little bit of the story of how he came to be published by Egmont Publishing, the people who worked with him. One of the big things I learned from this was just how in awe Don Rosa was at the popularity of the Duck comics in Europe. And that knocked my socks off because I knew that, it's Disney. You know that Disney are popular characters, but understanding that the Disney characters are more popular in Europe than Batman and X-Men are combined in America. It's more like it's like a national tradition to read Disney comics in Europe. So that blew my mind a bit. It blew his mind when he visited Europe. So not only are you getting excellent Duck stories in this, you're getting Rosa's perspective on the comics industry, the international comic scene, the legacy of these characters. This was a lot of fun. Then I Like Ike. These are just some sketches he did as a college student, and he is just he's a little too humble. He'll undersell what a good artist he is by saying, oh, he wasn't much of an artist before he did Duck comics. These are a riot, and these are the works of a cartoonist who loves cartooning and is just endlessly creative. So what he did was when he mailed his friend, he would actually draw something funny on the envelope, and as time got on, he had to get more and more creative with what he drew. He drew one pretending to be a little preschool kid. He drew one where he used the Eisenhower stamp as the image on the TV. He drew a cornflakes box with his friend's address at the top and his address on this side, a reader's disgust with all sorts of great puns as story titles, but the story titles are all jokes. He's got one where it's Eisenhower leading a class of Thomas Jefferson stamps and what they have to do to be good stamps growing up, never get put on an envelope sent to this address. Leonardo da Vinci painting the Eisenhower stamp. And then he did one where he didn't even put the address as a final joke for the postman, just to see if the postman would know to deliver it to that address. And of course, it got returned to sender. So, fantastic, highest recommendation. What I've learned from this is Don Rosa is an artist I want to keep looking into. I want to read his entire library and the entire Karl Barks library so that I can understand both of these artists across 2 generations. Karl Barks has already become a famous artist where comic historians will say Karl Barks, Karl Barks, Karl Barks, and recognize the impact that this one artist had on generations. It's completely massive how popular these characters are across the world. Beyond the American market, where they've diminished in popularity, these are some of the most popular characters in the world. Don Rosa is a incredibly popular second generation of Donald Duck artist where he's paying tribute to Karl Barks. I don't think that we've fully come to understand just how wonderful a series of comics Don Rosa has done. I'm glad this treasury exists because it gets people like me who are interested in the history of the medium, interested in Don Rosa's work and the artists who came before him. There is so much good stuff here for artists to learn from. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Highest recommendation. Catch you later.